Welcome everyone to the special Global Harmonization Initiative webinar series. We are very pleased to announce these webinars because it's for a special day, International Food Safety Day. And this webinar is together with the International Food Safety Organization based in Hong Kong, a professional organization to ensure and promote food safety practices along the food chain from farm to fork. And Global Harmonization Initiatives, you probably all know it, is an international non-for-profit impartial organization, science-based, with 1,500 members, with 66 ambassadors across the world from 130 countries. And we are engaging and empowering food scientists and experts in industry, governments, and academia to voice scientific consensus and make recommendations of food safety law and regulations globally. Welcome again. Before we continue, I would like to say a very exciting news and announce the dates and the new website for our Congress that is coming next year from 25th to 27th of June 2025 in Hilton Hotel Rotterdam in the Netherlands. This is the GHI World Congress, which is going to be on the topics of connecting food security, safety, healthy, and sustainability challenges ahead. And the Congress website is ready to go. You can reach it on www.ghiworldcongress.org. You're more than welcome to go and submit your abstracts, and we will be happy to welcome you there in Rotterdam next year. Today's webinar is very important because we're celebrating a special day, which is International Food Safety Day. It is proposed by the United Nations from the Food Health Organization and World Agriculture Organization to be celebrated because of its importance for all humanity. And first Food Safety Day was celebrated in 2019. 6 years ago was pronounced, and now we are all celebrating it globally because this is an essential for protecting public health by preventing foodborne illnesses, ensuring the availability of safe and nutritious food, and supporting food security. It also stimulates economic developments by reducing the financial burden of foodborne diseases and improving access to global markets through strict food safety standards. Raising awareness, education, and empowering people across the world and consumers to make informed food choices and advocate for higher standards are very important things that we all should look upon. Additionally, it encourages governments to strengthen regulatory frameworks and foster international collaborations and innovations in food safety practices, contributing to a safer and healthier world. I would like to welcome our speakers, Professor Ho Shan Kwang, who is a professor at School of Life Sciences at the Chinese University of Hong Kong and director of Hong Kong Jain Tech Limited and ProBio Life Limited, Life Honorary Advisor also for International Food Safety Association. Our second speaker is John Points, Independent Food Quality Consultant and Chair of Scientific Committee of the Institute of Food Science and Technology in the United Kingdom. And our last but not least speaker is Dr. Helen Onyanka, Associate Professor of School of Chemical Engineering from the University of Birmingham, United Kingdom, and Deputy Director of Birmingham Institute of Sustainability and Climate Action at the University of Birmingham, United Kingdom. Welcome all, and you can put all of your questions at the chat We are going to attend together with our communication director, Nico Stanley, which I want to warmly thank for all the efforts for putting this webinar together. And she is going to help me with all of questions that you're going to ask our renowned speakers. And we will start now with Professor Hoi Shang Kwang, Emeritus Professor of School of Life Sciences at the Chinese University of Hong Kong and Director of Hong Kong Jane Tex Limited and ProBioLife Limited, a Life Honorary Advisor of International Food Safety Association, Hong Kong. He's going to talk about harnessing probiotics, a new frontier in preventing and managing foodborne illnesses. Over to you.
Hello. What I'm going to discuss with you today is the use of probiotics to prevent and manage foodborne illnesses. Foodborne illnesses has always been a concern. Recently, we started to realize the importance of our gut microbiome in the protection of foodborne illnesses. To maintain a healthy gut microbiome, we can use probiotics. The uses of probiotics can help us to prevent and manage foodborne illnesses. Foodborne illnesses, sometimes referred to as foodborne diseases or as food poisoning, there are two main types: foodborne infections and foodborne intoxications. In this webinar, I will emphasize foodborne infections. So, what is foodborne infection? Foodborne infection is disease caused by a living organism. It may grow in food and through food to human, and actually invades the tissues, grows the numbers that can cause diseases. Salmonella infection is an example of foodborne infection. Salmonella ingested with food in numbers sufficient to overcome the host defense, the organism would grow in the host gut. The organism would affect the gut and causing gastroenteritis. The organism would appear in feces in large numbers. Some common foodborne infections are salmonellosis caused by Salmonella, vibriosis caused by Vibrio parahymiticus, and cholera caused by Vibrio cholerae. And for viruses, the most important one is norovirus, and that can be parasites or amoeba foodborne diseases. The virulence of the pathogens depends on its numbers ingested, its ability to attach to the host, to invade host tissues, to produce toxins, and to overcome host immune system. The host defends itself through its immune system, through physical barriers, the lateral microflora, especially the gut microbiome, also flushing mechanisms and chemical barriers. So in virulence, the pathogen would tip the balance towards the disease. So to tip the balance back to more healthy status, maybe we can use probiotics to enhance the host defense system, to enhance the immune system, to provide better physical barriers, and help the gut microbiome to be healthier, and maybe some other mechanisms. The burden of foodborne diseases is substantial. Every year, 1 in 10 people would fall ill, and 33 million people would have died every year. The children under 5 years old, are more susceptible to foodborne diseases. Every year, 420,000 children under 5 died. and account for 1/3 of all deaths from foodborne diseases. The foodborne diseases acquired in the United States in 2011 is as follows. The major pathogens are bacteria, especially Salmonella, number one foodborne disease causing bacteria. Each year, it causes about 1 million people to fall ill due to Salmonella, and the percentage is about 11%. Campylobacter comes second, causing about 845,000 people to have that Campylobacter infection. The percentage is about 8.5%. For viruses, norovirus is really terrible. It caused about 5 million people to fall ill because of it, and the percentage is 58% of all foodborne diseases. In Southeast Asia, the situation is also very serious. Each year, we have 150 million people fall ill, and 175,000 died. And 60 million children under 5 would fall ill, and 50,000 died. It's really quite substantial. How about that in Hong Kong? In Hong Kong, we have chemical, microbiological, physical, and other problems related to food diseases. And chemical is by far the most important one, but microbiological comes second and accounts for about 31%. And the foodborne pathogens in Hong Kong are mainly Vibrio parahemolyticus and Salmonella, and each one accounts for about 30%. And for viruses, it's norovirus again. So each year we have about 200 cases, and you see in the COVID years we tend to stay home and eat more healthier, and the number dropped. But now the cases number has risen again, and each year is about less than 1,000 people fall ill. This is a common picture you can see in Hong Kong restaurants, a lot of different rows of barbecue meat. But this one, the parboiled chicken, is not barbecued, it's not roast, but it's the most dangerous one. It's parboiled, and it has higher risk of salmonellosis. So Salmonella is related to meat, poultry especially, and also egg and dairy products, milk, cream, and so on. Salmonellosis is caused by Salmonella species, two main types, typhoid fever and gastroenteritis, caused by Salmonella typhimurium. And the sources are the meats, poultry, dairy products, and eggs, and some other foods got contaminated by eggs or dairy products in the processing plant. Symptoms are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, fever, and so on. So the control so far for Salmonella is to have Salmonella-free animals and Salmonella-free animal feeds. We have to pasteurize them first, proper processing, and educate personnel and consumers to handle the food safely. So how about using probiotics? Another bacteria that causes rubiosis is Vibrio parahemolyticus, especially serious in Hong Kong because Hong Kong people eat a lot of seafoods. So the sources are seafoods, fishes, shellfishes, such as shrimps, crabs, clams, oysters, and so on. Symptoms are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, fever, abdominal pain, chills, headache. And the control is avoid eating undercooked or raw seafoods, especially during warm seasons. Good food plant sanitation and food preparation hygiene is important to avoid contamination of cooked seafood by seawater. Again, can we use probiotics? Alright, so what are probiotics? Probiotics are bacteria. It comes in fermented foods and also as supplements. It originally are from fermented foods. For example, from animal source, we have yogurt, cheese. From plant sources, natto, miso, kimchi. These are the more traditional foods that contains probiotics. Probiotics are defined as live microorganisms which, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit on the host. The genera Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium are mainly used. There are extensive studies on probiotic effects. So examples are Bifidobacterium lactis, Lactobacillus acidophilus. The general probiotic effects are prevent diarrhea caused by certain pathogens, remediate inflammatory diseases and bowel syndromes, produce vitamins, ferment undigested foods, alleviate constipation, reduce cholesterol levels, stimulate host immune system, alleviate allergic response, and exert anti-tumor activity. So probiotics can help us to maintain healthy gut microbiome. That means good gut health and cause overall health benefits. So a healthy gut will have many functions, for example, digestion, and provide nutrients, and produce vitamins and hormones, as produce physical and biological barriers to pathogens, and maintain a well-balanced immune system. Of course, there are other functions. Probiotics can produce antimicrobial substances, modulate the immune system, enhance the epithelial barrier, increase adhesion to the intestinal mucosa, inhibit pathogenic adhesion, and competitively exclude pathogens, microorganisms. So the effects of the metabolites produced by probiotics on the gut, we have some examples here. It's a complex slide. We look at a few parts here. Say the Indo-3 lactic acid produced by the probiotics can attach to AHR receptors for the epithelial cells to produce interleukin 22, or Indo-3 probiotic acid with the PXR receptor and express more tight junction proteins. Of course, there are other metabolites like killing peptides, colonizing peptides, and so on to kill the pathogens or prevent the pathogens to attach to the gut wall. Also, the probiotics can regulate the intestinal barrier by using mucins, antimicrobial peptides, toll-like receptors binding, production of IgA and secretory IgA, and heat shock protein, P-glycoprotein production in the mucus layer, providing the intestinal barrier to pathogens. Also, it can modulate immune system. The specific mechanisms are the hormonal response modulation, producing IgA, IgE, and cell-mediated immune response, balancing dendritic cells, and T regulator modulation, Th1, Th2. And the A-specific mechanisms is to improve the barrier integrity, mucins and competitive exclusion of bacteria along the epithelium, and modification of the local microenvironment, for example, lower the pH of productions of antimicrobial peptides, short-chain fatty acids, and so on. It can also regulate the innate defense mechanism. So the pathogens sometimes would cause the losing of the tight junction and increase the permeability of the epithelial wall and causing leaky gut. And so bacteria and other unfavorable, dangerous materials can enter the inside of the gut and get into the blood. But probiotics can regain the tight junction, and so the receptors are produced more to protect the gut junction and have a tight junction, so the integrity is improved. Also, probiotics can regulate the adaptive immune system by causing signal transductions and factors to elicit immune responses. The function of probiotics related to health issues will need to be confirmed by evidences, especially through clinical trials. So I use the database search engine ProbioQuest to look at clinicaltrials.org listing of these health issues related to probiotics. So here you can see the diseases or the health issues: diarrhea, colitis, and gastroenteritis are those that are related to foodborne diseases. Not too many over the years. And I use also PubMed to look at clinical trials using the search query probiotics, foodborne diseases, and clinical trial. And you can see the count is really quite small. So not every year we would have clinical trials on such foodborne diseases related to probiotics. And they are all in single digits. You can see in recent years there are more attention to this, but still quite few. And when we look at specific foodborne diseases caused by Salmonella and Vibrio parahemolyticus, and we can see that the numbers is also not very high. And increased in recent years, now that we understand and we pay more attention to probiotics related to foodborne diseases. And I also look at the probiotics studies in PubMed, listed in PubMed on Salmonella and Vibrio parahemolyticus and clinical trials. So you can see again the clinical trials are not too many. And again, in recent years, there's actually no clinical trials. So anyway, the probiotics can be used as part of the food safety strategy. It can help improve the public health and utilized in food processing to enhance public health and lower the risk of foodborne diseases outbreaks. And it can be used in many different industries, including dairy, beverage, and baking industries. And it can combine with sanitation procedures such as ISO 22000 and HACCP. And of course, we can use probiotics to make functional foods. Hopefully, we can reduce the antibiotic use, and we can treat various disorders using probiotics. other than foodborne diseases. Many different products are now using probiotics. In addition to the traditional fermented foods, there are new products using probiotics, especially using spore probiotics. A few examples are tea bags, cookies, fruit bars, chocolate, and proteins. These products all contain probiotics. And for regulatory considerations, IFSA has guidelines on probiotics in food. Restriction on labeling. IFSA does not allow the use of the term probiotic on labels of products containing GHI strains. But exceptions are for fermented foods. So if a probiotic is used in the production of a fermented food, then the product can be labeled as probiotic food. FDA guidelines on probiotics include the safety. The FDA only considers the safety of the product's intended use, but not its benefits. However, you can claim some health claims through a separate petition process. And the labeling requires dietary supplements to be accurately labeled and free of contaminants or impurities. The American Gastroenterological Association, AGA, provide practical guidelines on the role of probiotics in the management of gastrointestinal disorders. Among the 8 recommendations of probiotic uses, the one related to foodborne diseases is in children with acute infectious gastroenteritis, we suggest against the use of probiotics. So there are challenges and limitations on using probiotics to manage and prevent foodborne diseases. For example, the results of studies are very variable. Different studies use different probiotic strains for different indications, and it's almost impossible to generalize. And the efficacy is strain specific. It's important to choose the right probiotic strains. One species has many strains, so each strain needs to be tested to have clinical evidence to support its use. And also there are safety concerns. Guidelines for safe use in some situations are not well established. And also the regulatory concerns. Different countries and regions have different regulations on probiotic uses. So how do we select probiotics? A good probiotics needs to be certified by international organizations. It has to have clinical trials to support its activities, its functions, and the specific strains are clearly labeled and used, and the number of beneficial bacteria, whether it's 1 billion, 2 billion, 50 billion, needs to be clearly labeled and specified and correlated to the clinical trials. And the chances of survival of the probiotics in the gut will need to be established. And there shouldn't be any additives. Actually, the more important thing is to shape your gut microbiome to make it healthy. The best strategy is as follows: natural whole food diet, balanced nutrient-dense diet, avoid energy excess diet, and use of prebiotics, dietary fibers, probiotics through fermented vegetables or fermented dairy products, and of course, use of probiotic supplements, and avoid antibiotics if possible. Also look for probiotic formula with prebiotics. So prebiotics are foods for probiotics and intestinal probiotics, and usually dietary fiber. So the take-home message here is that I've discussed with you the use of specific strains against specific health targets is very important. The mechanisms of probiotics for foodborne disease prevention and management include the pathogen inhibition, gut health enhancement, immune system boost. Use of probiotics may reduce the antibiotic reliance, and clinical evidence is very important and is really needed and not enough has been carried out so far. And probiotics are used to make different kinds of foods, and the regulations and guidelines vary in different regions. That's all I'd like to discuss with you today. Thank you for attending my talk. I'm sure that you will enjoy the rest of this webinar.
Thank you, Professor Roy Shan Kwang, for your very informative talk on harnessing probiotics and new frontiers in preventing and management of foodborne illnesses. Professor Kwong could not join us as he had other engagements, but we are very grateful that we still have him.
Can I also comment, because he did say he couldn't be here with us today, but he's very happy to take any questions that anybody has. So if you want to add questions here, and then when we do the retake of the video and put it on YouTube, we can also persuade him, I'm sure, to give some answers on video to those questions. So please subscribe to our GHI YouTube channel to be updated on that. Thank you.
This will be really wonderful if we have more followers on our YouTube channel. We are all expecting you to join us.
Hi. A question was asked after the webinar about how we can use probiotics in baking. Here, I give you the answer. Yes, probiotics can be used in various food industries. In addition to the traditional fermented foods, such as yogurt, miso, natto, and so on, which would contain some probiotics. Here are some examples of other food products that use probiotics. Look at cookies are one of them. Cookie is one of the baked food products. Let us consider the temperature effects on microbial growth and survival. We can plot the growth rate of a microorganism against increased temperature. You can see the growth rate increases from a T minimum, the minimum temperature for growth, to optimum temperature for growth, and then drops. The growth rate drops until T maximum, all the growth was stopped. The optimum growth temperature is a narrow range, 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. When the temperature is between the minimum temperature for growth, T minimum, and T optimum, the increased temperature will speed up growth. Actually, the low temperature stops microbial growth, but it does not kill them. When the temperature is above T optimum, the growth stops and survival decreases. Vegetative cells can be killed by exposure to temperature above T maximum. So here, the microorganism would be killed. When we plot the survival of a microorganism against the increased temperature, you can see that for vegetative cells, the T minimum for growth and the survival is the highest. And it drops when the temperature increases until T max for growth, and after that, the survival actually stopped. And here the two plots shows that the spores are much better in survival than the vegetative cells. So now we can see that high temperature kills the microorganism. So the major concern of using probiotics in the baking industry is the heat stability of the probiotics, which is usually bacteria. So baking is a method to cook food using dry heat, typically in an oven. The process primarily involves the transformation of dough or batter into baked goods such as bread, cakes, cookies, and pastries through the application of heat. The challenges here is the heat sensitivity of probiotics during baking. The solutions are heat resistant strengths, encapsulation techniques, or addition after baking. Usually, probiotics used in baking industry are used in fermentation, for example, used in sourdough starters or baked product development, making probiotic-enriched breads, muffins, cookies, chips, and so on. So you can use probiotics to make sourdough bread, which is a fermented bread having fermentation before baking, such as using lactobacteria. And the purpose of doing this is to improve the nutrient bioavailability, easier for digestion, having traditional taste and texture, but the bacteria, even though it is a probiotics, it would not survive the baking temperature, and the bacteria would not exist in the final product. So to have probiotics in the final product, you can add probiotics such as spore-forming probiotics like Bacillus coagulans in the process. And usually it's not fermented, and the final spore-forming probiotics will survive the high heat and occur in the final product. So the easiest way, the best way to make probiotics enriched baking products is to use spore-forming bacteria. So spore-forming bacteria can exist as endospores, which can be activated and germinate into vegetative cells, and then they grow into vegetative cells under favorable conditions. But in bad conditions, they will form spores, and the spores can survive high heat and exist in the product after baking. The endospores can survive high heat is because it has a coat and a thick cortex, and the cell is embedded in the cortex. It's actually in a dormant state. It's impermeable to water and nutrients, and it can withstand significant heat. I'd like to introduce this paper on heat resistance of potential spore probiotics in different unit operations. I will not go into the detail of the paper, but you can see this paper studied 8 unit operations on the resistance of 8 Bacillus strains with probiotic properties. The unit operations contains many different ways of operation, including baking, and the food matrices contains milk, orange juice, and so on. And the Bacillus strains are those claimed to be probiotics. The heat resistance of the potential spore probiotics were assessed by measuring their decimal reductions. That is the number of decimal reductions after the unit operation. So the effect could be evaluated. And some strains show high resistance to most unit operations. I took out the number of decimal reduction after baking to show you here. So you can see with all these 8 spore-forming Bacillus bacteria, the decimal reduction number after baking is between 0.2 to 3.2. So quite a few of them has a decimal reduction of less than 1. So that means between minimum reduction to about 10% survival after baking. So 10% survival is good, so we can still have 10% of the probiotics in the end product, even after high heat baking. So the results of this paper shows that the implications for probiotic application is that you have to choose the probiotics considering the resistance to the processing unit operations. And it actually has high potential to develop probiotic foods because many of these probiotics are really resistant to high heat. The take-home message here are that probiotics are used in different kinds of foods, including baking. And two ways to use probiotics in baking is to make sourdough bread used in production, but the probiotics would not survive and exist in end product. And to develop other baked foods is to make probiotic-enriched foods. Baking uses dry heat, so the heat resistance is the major concern. So the best choice is to use spore-forming probiotics. And for each different unit operation would need to be considered for each of the strengths of the probiotics. So here are some references you can go to and learn more about using probiotics in baking. All right, so that's all I would like to discuss with you about using probiotics in the baking industry. Thank you very much for listening to this supplementary information, and bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor Roy Shan Kwang, for your very informative talk on harnessing probiotics and new frontiers in preventing and management of foodborne illnesses. Professor Kwong could not join us as he had other engagements, but we are very grateful that we still have him. Okay, we are going now, John Points, an independent food quality consultant and chair of scientific committee of the Institute of Food Science and Technology in the United Kingdom. He's going to talk about the complexity of regulations for human milks. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much. As I say, I'm going to talk about something that is unexpected, really, or was unexpected to me, certainly if you're talking about food, and if the theme of today is to expect the unexpected, because I would never have considered really human milk, breast milk, in the same context as food. But this is something I was involved in maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I say this is based on a talk that I did at IFSA a couple of years ago, but it's something that's still very current and still exactly the same issues are raised. So as I say, it hasn't gone away at all, and it's something that interested me and hopefully will interest you as well. So I'm, as Diane said, I'm an independent consultant based in the UK. I advise food businesses primarily on safety, but I like to position myself as somebody who could advise businesses that are looking in a sort of new space or something that hasn't been thought about before, and this certainly hit that. So I suppose it shouldn't have been that unexpected to me, because if you think about it, breast milk does not always come from the maternal mother. I mean, the history of wet nursing goes back centuries, almost into time immemorial. And depending on what country you're in or what culture or what period of history, depends very much how common it is. So, for example, in the UK, if you go back 500 years to a person of a certain cultural class, an upper class person or a middle class person, it would be almost unheard of for the mother to feed their own child. They would have a wet nurse. And today in the UK, it's almost the other way around. It would be unheard of to have a wet nurse, but if you go to other countries, other cultures, for example, this paper from Malaysia was only 6-7 years ago, talking about the best way to identify wet nurses. It's still common in some parts of the world. So from that point of view, the idea of breast milk as a food, not from a maternal mother, isn't that unusual. But going beyond that, the concept of expressing the milk and then sharing it, again, that's not new, particularly in a clinical setting. That's been around for 100 years or more. It's absolutely normal in hospitals, in neonatal units, so for preterm babies or for sick babies, to have a milk bank. And almost exclusively, I say this is for sick or preterm babies. Usually, depending on how it operates, the milk is, you'd call it administered on site, so under clinical supervision. And but the milk bank itself, depending on the country and how it operates, it may be off site, may be run by a charity or another public sector organization. The milk's usually pasteurized and frozen, although not exclusively. In some countries, it's supplied raw and fresh to the babies. And depending on the country, there may be some sort of, internal market for this, some sort of internal charge, or it might be provided free of charge to the hospital. So within that setting, again, human milk as a food is not unusual. If you go one stage beyond that, the concept of milk sharing communities amongst families or friends, again, it's not typical, certainly in the UK, but it's not unheard of. In the UK and the US particularly, it was probably more popular in the 1970s, but even recently, you get communities of say families or friends who will share the milk between the babies. So again, sort of taking it one step further. But the thing that's really brought this to a head, like many other things, is the internet. And so nowadays, if there's a lady who has excess milk, excess express milk, and wants to share it, there are mechanisms and there are ways of sharing it with strangers effectively online. Again, I wouldn't say it's usual, but it's certainly not unheard of in the UK and the US particularly. For mothers to share milk or even sell to strangers. And I'll explain why later, but I have actually bought breast milk online. It cost me over £100 for a couple of feeds, and it just arrived in the post in a jiffy bag. And as somebody who comes from a food supply safety background, that just, oh my God, that shocked me when you start thinking about the safety risks of that. But these articles, the New York Times one is last year. I went online this morning just out of interest. So this was an hour ago. Here's a lady in the UK on Facebook Marketplace saying, hi, I don't drink, I don't smoke, don't take drugs. Please contact me if you want my milk. And in her case, she's giving it away. This is altruistic. This is wanting to help people. So, as I say, this, the risks of this in terms of food safety are obvious. Really, if you're sending unpasteurized milk through the post, you don't really know its provenance. They're huge, and so the question that was put to me and has come up since really is there scope for a new ethical business model that will put some sort of structure behind this? So basically, put a milk bank in the middle so that donating mums can donate to a milk bank. The milk bank can provide the milk to the recipient carers and put a bit of trust in place in the middle of this. And you will notice I have said a business model. I'm not talking about a charity here or a clinical hospital. This is a business. So this is people who would not be eligible for for hospital milk because their babies are not sick or not preterm. There's some other reason they want to source breast milk. And actually, you know, from one point of view, you could see this as a win-win situation. From the donating mums, they get confidence that they've got this altruistic use of their excess milk. They would get reimbursed their expenses, which should give them a bit of financial support in their maternity leave. And I will come back to this because this is an absolute key point, this expense reimbursement. And also, as part of the business, the community, the network, get midwife support for their own feeding. And then from the carer's point of view, they would basically get milk for their baby. And there may be a number of reasons why this. It might be quite niche. So things like surrogate parents or adoptive parents or gay couples, people who are struggling to feed themselves, and again, get midwife breastfeeding support here. And the whole model would be designed to give confidence in the whole system. So that was the premise. So this was a UK business in this case who wanted to set up on this model. And so when we look at what standards and guidelines and regulations there are for milk banks, there's a lot already. They're not harmonized across the world, but there's some principles. So there's the European Milk Bank Association has made some recommendations, and the blue paper there is from the UK for the National Health Service here for hospitals. And the principles are things like careful screening of the donors. So blood tests, interviews, health questionnaires, lots of testing of the raw unpasteurized milk for microbiological load. I'll come back to the guidance is in hospital, you don't pool raw milk from different donors. And then I say when it's pasteurized, there's some quite specific pasteurization recommendations. It's got to be effective, clearly, but you want it quite gentle because you don't want to destroy the enzymes and some of the nutrients of the milk. But the principle is the whole thing is based on hazard analysis and critical control points. You know, a standard food safety methodology that's legal requirement in food businesses of a certain size. So the principle is you apply food manufacturing systems and safety systems to this clinical settings. But all of these rules and regulations, they're designed for self-contained clinical settings. They're not really extensive enough for the business model we were talking about, supplying milk to people in their homes. For example, there's absolutely nothing about recall procedures, which would be absolutely key. So what we did in this case, we combined these two sets of guidelines and regulatory requirements and certification standards. So from the clinical guidelines, we took all the things about donor health screening, pasteurization conditions. We didn't take the rules about no pooling of donor milk because basically the only practical way to operate this sort of milk bank model as a business and to control stock is to pool milk. You can't operate where you just have one donor going to one supplier. But I'm not talking about pooling milk from thousands of different ladies and mixing it together. It's generally 2 or 3 donors would be pooled together to pasteurize. But we took key aspects, and in fact, our aim was to be fully compliant with ISO 22000, which is a food safety standard. And we picked that one because it's a systems-based approach, so we could fit it to our model rather than a prescriptive GFSI type standard, which we couldn't really fit. So things like full traceability, as I say, recall tests, and also things like incident investigation and corrective and preventative actions, which aren't in the clinical guidelines. We took those as well, and basically made our own safety management system. So we got that. And then the first stage, if you were a food business setting up online in the UK, the first thing you would have to do is register with your local authority. It's a legal requirement, and you come and get inspected. So we were in a strange position as we were crying out to be inspected and regulating. We were actively petitioning the regulatory authorities and say, look, we're the epitome of a high-risk business here. We're about as high risk as you can get. You know, we're going to be supplying milk to babies. But in the UK, the law is written in such a way that it didn't clearly come under any regulatory agency. So we have a food standards agency, but their initial response was infant milk's not in their legal scope. It falls under the Department of Health. But the initial response from the Department of Health was they only have legal responsibility for hospitals. They have no legal authority in the private sector, so they can't inspect us. There is in the UK an authority called the Care Quality Commission, which do have authority for private tissue banks, but when you read the legal definition of tissue, it doesn't include breast milk. So if we were supplying kidneys, for example, that would be fine. They would look after us, but breast milk, no. But I say this was the initial position. Fortunately, you know, the authorities talked to each other, and the outcome was the Food Standards Agency took ownership, and we got some very useful visits from the local authority and inspections from them. But it's not strictly within their legal scope. So I said the food safety management system is based on HACCP, and the first, I suppose, philosophical question we had was, what's the scope of that HACCP flowchart? So those of you familiar with HACCP, you know that, you know, an early stage of it is you write a flowchart of the stages of what you're doing, and traditionally for a food manufacturing business, if it was a dairy, you'd just be talking about that green bit in the middle. So you start when the raw materials arrive on your site, and you finish when they're dispatched out of the door. Typically, that's a HACCP flow. But actually, in our case, we needed to consider the entire end-to-end process. I know, Deanna, you mentioned farm to fork. This is really baby to baby. So at one end, you have a mother and a baby expressing the milk. There's a process there. They're expressing it, they're storing it at home. Somehow it's couriered to the lab in these little, you know, plastic bags, which I'm sure you've seen if you've expressed and fed yourself. I say it's then processed in I call it a lab because it was a lab. It was literally in a laboratory. We were doing this in a laboratory space, not in a manufacturing site. Processed, I'll go through, and then frozen, and then sent out to the client. And again, at that end of the process, it's going to be stored, it's going to be reheated, and it's going to be fed to the baby. So there's that entire process. And although we don't have direct control over it, we have an absolute moral responsibility for it, and it should be included in our HACCP flow. So in HACCP terms, those are familiar with HACCP, they talk about vulnerable users, and that is the customer they're talking about. But actually, we've got a vulnerable user at the supplier end of the chain. There's a baby. The mother who is expressing the milk has got a baby, and what you don't want is for her to donate the milk at the expense of her own baby's feeding. So there has to be rules about the maximum limit and amount expressed and donated. And this is where we come to the thing about financial support. You can't have a situation where the mother's running this as a business. It can't be a side hustle. Yes, you want to support them, you want to reimburse their expenses, you want to make sure they can get correct nutrition through maternity leave, and etc. But as soon as you get to the point where they're making a profit, where it's a side hustle, they've got a financial incentive to sell their milk at the expense of their own baby. So there's also things about regular weight checks of baby and regular midwife support as well for the mother. So this thing about the financial profit, the actual HACCP mitigation feeds directly into the commercials of the business and the operating model. I'll say the bits we take from the hospital guidelines and regulations are almost analogous to supplier approval in GFSI terms. So it's not straightforward for a lady to sign up as a donor. There's a lot involved. It's got to go through an independent clinical assessment. So we would pay for her to go to a local clinic, get health checked, have to provide blood screening samples for viruses, and regular self-assessment questionnaires, particularly checks on medication she's taking. So there's a lot of rules about the donor. There's a lot of guidance, and it's only guidance we could give on how she expresses the milk herself, her own hygiene, washing her hands, what equipment to use, provide her with the equipment we want to use, because otherwise people would just send it in old lunch boxes or something. And that would be checked when we collected the milk on the doorstep, which included the consent checklist. But what we never found a satisfactory solution for, really, or whether was the sort of hygiene monitoring of how she stored the milk before we collected it in her own freezer. This is a picture of my freezer. It's not too bad, I don't think. I'm happy to share a picture of my freezer, but it would never pass muster on a food manufacturing site. There's no temperature control, no records of temperature, etc., etc. You can't really control that in somebody else's home. We then collect the milk. So it's a courier. In the UK, we're lucky it's not that big. But there's again a moral obligation. Once a lady's signed up as a donor, you've got to commit to regular collection. You can't leave her hanging there expressing milk and just building up. And you really need a personal visit. You want. Although this is an online model, there is a face-to-face aspect to this, and you need contact with the donor. You need to get a feel really for her health, her personal circumstances, her own baby's health, if you can. And what that meant in practice was personal collections. In our case, we did it fortnightly by a staff member. It's not a courier. It's not put in the post. We'd actually go and visit. So in practice, this limits the geographic radius of where you can operate, even though it's an online model again. It's probably about 2 hours driving. And we did some, as you would in a food business, I suppose, call it raw material. It's a bit harsh, but that's the terminology we use, raw material acceptance testing. So it would be standard things you would do in the food industry here. So it's things like physical checks for it's clean, it's hard frozen, it's fully labeled with full traceability, then laboratory testing, pathogens are easy. Undeclared medication is an interesting one. I'm really talking about antidepressants, because a lot of postnatal ladies are on antidepressants. They're not a safety risk in milk. These things are licensed for use in nursing mothers, or if they wouldn't be prescribed them. So it's something probably a hospital milk bank wouldn't have to worry about too much. Okay, they're safe, they're there. But if you're a commercial business, and if you effectively somebody's buying the milk, they expect it to not have residues in it. You know, they would be quite shocked if they found residues, however safe they were. So our rules were, unfortunately, you know, no antidepressants. And also, this comes back to the financial incentives, but just test for adulteration, test for that ladies aren't bulking the milk up with cow's milk in this case. We never found a lab test that could test for water dilution. If you do this in a milk dairy, they do it by freezing point depression, and they've got a whole set of reference values of milk freezing point, depending on water content, but nobody's got that for breast milk. So it's not really one you could do. I mentioned the traceability. In terms of traceability and recall, so because we were mixing milk, we decided we needed to trace every individual bag that came through the door, had a unique reference number, the little bags, with the mother's ID, the collection point, the rest of it. And we could trace that through exactly which batches it went into, which bottles it went into, which mothers it went to. And we took the decision that that had to be push button, that had to be instant. If we had a problem, we needed to know exactly which milk went where, which other batches were affected. The 4-hour rule that's typical in GHI schemes is a bit too long. So basically, you needed a relational database. You couldn't do it on a spreadsheet. You needed to build a system. So that's the unusual bit, I suppose. The middle section of the process, I won't talk about too much because it's just like any other food industry. It's like a dairy. You know, the milk came in, it was stored frozen in these little bags. It was defrosted. A certain number of bags went into a mix. The mix was then bottled into 200 ml bottles. The bottles were capped and pasteurized. So pasteurized within the bottles were never opened again. Then frozen, stored, sent out. It's, say, fairly standard stuff. The critical control points in terms of HACCP are all around the pasteurization and the cooling. So very controlled, very prescriptive. It's effectively 63 degrees pasteurization at half an hour. So it needed to be logged very precisely. We were looking for a 6 log reduction in micro load, but retaining nutrition. And I saw actually on the people coming in, Andy Kerridge is one of the listeners of this, and thanks for his expert help with this as well. But we verified this with our own challenge test. So we inoculated some milk, pasteurized it, and checked that we're getting that reduction. And that explains where I was buying breast milk, honestly. That was my breast milk purchase. But yeah, so there's a lot behind this and a lot of very close monitoring. And then you come on to, I say the final part of it is delivery. And again, you've got a moral responsibility for this. You can't just put it in the post. It's got to be a personal visit at a pre-arranged time. You can't be leaving it on the doorstep. And also, again, you want this contact, you want this feel with the recipients, because it's an online business. Basically, you want to make sure it's not a 40-year-old bodybuilder who's just putting the stuff on their cereal, that it genuinely is a carer with a baby, and the baby's healthy, and et cetera, et cetera. So again, in practice, this limits the geographical area you can cover. But that's not the end of the flowchart. I say at the end of this, the consumer is not the customer. It's not the person who bought the milk. It's a baby. And And so there's another stage in here as well, which you've got to consider, is how that milk gets into the baby. You've got to give instructions on storage, on warming, effectively to have a midwife on call if there's problems, and to give advice on this. And also to support, to enable, if it's a mother who wants to breastfeed themselves, actually to support them to get them going, because it say some of the people who were interested in this as customers were new mothers who really wanted to breastfeed themselves, who were struggling and didn't want to use formula milk in the period while they were getting it going. So there's a sort of moral obligation there as well. So all of this was built into the safety management system, and we had procedures for all of this. I'm going to stop there because I've missed something. Actually, you're welcome to unmute and shout out very briefly if you want, if you can think of what we missed, and if you haven't heard this presentation before, because that'll give you a clue. But if you were working in a food industry, there's something in your systems which is so routine, you do so often, you probably don't even think about in your quality and safety management, and I haven't even mentioned, and I didn't think of at all. Any ideas? I'll tell you. If you're working in a food business, you'd taste it. You'd taste the product. There'd be some sensory analysis. I'm a 50-year-old repressed Englishman. It wouldn't never have occurred to me to taste the milk. All of our shelf life assessments, all of our batch assessments, everything was based on micro tests. Nothing was based on organoleptic tests at all. And basically we started having complaints. We started having complaints to say, oh, baby won't take it. And how do you know? Well, when I warm the milk up, I taste it. This is from the mothers. Oh yeah, of course you do. And when we tasted it, we actually found that actually, although 3 months frozen storage is fine from a micro point of view, by the end of that, you could taste the difference in the milk. It's tasting rancid. So effectively, it was going off. And we completely overlooked that. But that's of interest. That's if it ever did it again, that's something I'd remember to add into the system. But in conclusion, I say this. I think this sort of model is going to happen again. So I've been contacted probably 3 times over the last couple of years by people out of the blue saying, "Oh, I've had a brilliant new idea for a business. What about this?" I said, "Oh yeah, oh okay. Have you thought about X, Y, and Z?" Sooner or later, I think somebody's going to try and set this up again. I'm not talking about the freeze-dried, quite dodgy supplies you get in some parts of the world to your bodybuilders and equivalent. I'm talking about whole milk, mother to mother, and a quality management system for this needs to cover the entire end-to-end process. I'm not going to say farm to fork; it's baby to baby. In terms of your classical HACCP, you've got the bit in the middle. You've got CCP's critical control points, prerequisites, operational prerequisites. You've got your intended use. But at the end of that, you've got to always remember there's a baby. But just as vulnerable at the other end of the chain is also a baby. And you've got to treat both with the same degree of conservatism in terms of the risk controls you put in. I will say our experience there isn't, I don't think, unique. This paper is just looking at hospital milk banks, but concluded, actually in terms of a regulatory position, it's quite inconsistent around the world. Inconsistent which ministries they come under, whether they're classed as food, whether they're classed as health. And I'm sure if you then get onto private sector, it's even worse. So I think for regulatory authorities, national regulatory authorities, there's quite a simple choice actually for this type of commercial milk bank. One, you could just ban them, you could prohibit them, and that's a perfectly reasonable decision to make. You might decide either the risks are too great or the risks of exploitation are too great, and therefore milk banks can only remain the preserve of healthcare or public sector. But if you're not going to do that, I think there needs to be some benchmarks, some regulatory systems which have to go beyond the existing ones for self-contained clinical settings, because I say that there are additional things to consider, like the transport, like the recall. So something based on the principles I've described. And at the moment, I'm not aware there is anything. Thank you very much for listening. Has anybody put any questions in the chat? Diane?
Thanks a lot, John. This was really, really engaging. And milk is such an important food. In fact, the most important food, as this is the first food the human starts to consume. And this is the most safe and nutritious food for any human being. And I'm glad that on the International Food Safety Day, we talk about this. You mentioned milk sharing model. This was in the essence of your talk. And there are lots of issues that are going on with this, and probably other issues that we haven't thought of. But I remember back at the time, my mom was telling me that I was born in Bulgaria. So back at the time, I was having many milk brothers and sisters because my mom was having more milk and was able to feed other babies of mothers that didn't have milk. So it's a practice that was shared before, and now it's good that is kind of rejuvenating and is starting to be able to be present again for people that are in this situation. How has the practice of milk sharing, this co-feeding, evolved with the advent of social media platform like Facebook Marketplace? This is a very interesting model, and one of the questions here we have.
Yeah, as I said, I think the main difference is now you can share with strangers. So previously it was always usually friends or family, it's local. It's people you knew. So the recipient would know the donor and have some sort of confidence that the milk was, fresh. It was genuine. It was safe. But now, say it could be strangers. It could be restricted to a local area, so you still go and collect. But I say, in my experience, it just came through the post in a brown paper bag. And that's really the difference. People are still, I think, offering for the same altruistic reasons. They know it's a precious resource. They've got more than they need for their baby. They want to share it. But there's that additional.
Yeah, and it's coming with lots of complications. Another question we have here from our audience, how do you inform mothers with all these legal necessities? Not easy to reach people lives in poorness, because you mentioned some mothers are selling their milk.
Yes, I think it's difficult, and because because a lot of mothers who want to purchase milk might not even think of basic microbiology, for example. So it's just getting across the message. There was a New York Times article there, which was the premise of that look, there are risks involved here. And if you want to buy milk or source milk, please go through a trusted source. And that's probably the extent of the messaging you could go to. You can't talk to people about critical control points and flowcharts and things. No.
Yeah. How about the shelf life of the milk? Another of our audience is asking.
Yes. So frozen in hospital milk banks. I think 3 months is quite typical, and so it's based on micro criteria. But we found that you could taste a difference after 3 months, and actually we put a 1 month shelf life on it. We never had the facilities to try, -80 storage, for example.
So there's a comment, John, internet sales are concerning across all food products. You highlighted the Facebook post about breast milk, a bit free. What is happening to try and regulate and cover this sector?
So in the UK, the Food Standards Agency have a general focus on online sales, particularly consumer to consumer sales. These sort of side hustles, the small scale things. But I don't think breast milk is on their radar particularly. It's certainly not. It's not within their legal scope of competence. So I think it depends very much on the country and what regulatory authorities are in place and what their legal scope is. It's potentially a loophole in some countries. It's something that's falling between the cracks.
And what are the potential implications if a regulator across the globe is not particular in the UK, but you can answer for UK, if these regulators choose to ban businesses like these private milk banks?
As I say, there's probably no immediate implications because I'm not aware of any in operation at the moment. The one I was involved in is no longer in operation. There are businesses which supply freeze-dried, components of breast milk, and so they would come under that. And I suppose it's exactly the same problems as any online sales. Is that it's effectively international. And so you can ban it in one country, but what's to stop people buying online from a platform in another country?
Yeah, whatever they can.
But I think for the actual mother to mother frozen milk, it's confined to a geographical location, really. So it would work within a country. You could ban it and enforce that.
Yeah. Is there any progress to close the loophole that exists in the UK in terms of breast milk as a food? This is another question from our audience.
No, as I say, I don't think it's I called it a loophole. I mean, legally it comes under health, and so does infant formula milk in terms of specifications and control. It comes under the Department of Health in the UK. I think it was, this case probably clarified it, and the Food Standards Agency took responsibility for it, and the precedent has been set, so they would do that again. So I don't think it's a particular issue. It was just it hadn't occurred before, and it needed clarifying.
And because GHI is about a regulation of safe food across the globe, if regulators decide to permit such businesses, what key principle, in your opinion, should an international regulatory framework include to ensure safety and ethical standards of breast milk?
So
Sure.
they should start with the guidelines for clinical settings. So stuff like the European Milk Bank Association guidelines. But I say they need to be expanded, I think. And in my view, actually ISO 22000 is a good starting point. It's a good systems approach. And I think if you applied both of those, it would pretty much cover everything.
Yeah. Okay. Nicola, are there any other questions from our audience that I didn't
Well, we have
mention?
some questions here about the thawing process before feeding. How does that work? We also had a question about shelf life.
Okay, so the thawing process is a slow thaw. So if anybody's a mother themselves, if they express milk for their own babies, they know they store it in little bags or bottles in the freezer, and then you generally thaw it in water. So effectively, what you don't want is hot spots in it. So it's the same as you would thaw and warm your own expressed milk. So thaw it in water, warm it gently, and if it is something like a microwave, make sure it's really, really well mixed. You put a bit on your wrist, check it before feeding it to the baby.
Yeah. Okay. There may be other questions coming, so probably we will ask these questions at the end. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Stay for now. And now we are going to continue with our last but not least speaker, Dr. Helen Onyanka, Associate Professor of School of Chemical Engineering at University of Birmingham. She's also Deputy Director of Birmingham Institute of Sustainability and Climate Action at University of Birmingham, the United Kingdom. We'll look at the future together with her in her talk about securing global food systems, challenges and strategies for ensuring food safety in a globalized world from 2028 to 2030. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be part of GHI, this webinar on International Food Safety Day. So just to give a bit of context, my specialist area in terms of research is sustainable food systems, with particular focus on food security, innovative technology of food production, and also food waste management. So at least you have a context of what I do. So moving on then, we have an emerging and a big issue at the moment affecting our climate. So our climate faces several critical environmental challenges like food waste. Lots of food is wasted every day, water pollution, climate change, loss of biodiversity, and also the increasing global population, amongst the most pressing issue that is affecting our food systems. These problems are really, really far-reaching because it affects our ecosystem and also our health, and then the sustainability of our planet is being challenged. So it's quite important that we understand how these problems and how we can address them to ensure a healthy and prosperous future for the populations to come. I really do like the topic of the World Food Safety Day or International Food Safety Day, which says expect the unexpected. So preparing ourselves, being aware of the challenges of my facing future, and thinking of innovative ways to address them is quite important. So looking at the challenges then, if we were to go further down, and a bit of statistics. So we have more than 800 million people that are affected by food scarcity. And about 2 million, or billion, suffer from malnutrition. This is statistics, and it's quite glaring. And then we know that environmental cost of food production is no longer sustainable. So there is a need to increase our food production by more than 60% in the next 3 decades to meet the demands of the growing world population. I mean, we're just growing every year. So using the correct method of food production, it's estimated that the global greenhouse gases that are going to be produced is going to increase by 80%. And we know what that means in terms of our climate change, the impact on climate change. So even livestock production, for example, like cows, produce 14.5% of the global greenhouse gases in emission, and the majority is methane. So we need a better solution. What can we do? So So I was saying at the beginning, and today our planet faces several critical environmental challenges like food waste, environmental pollution, water pollution, climate change, and loss of biodiversity, and also the increasing global population. These are amongst the pressing issues that are affecting our climate today. These problems have far-reaching consequences because it affects our ecosystem, our health is also impacted, and the sustainability of our planet is a big, big issue. So it's quite important that we understand and address these challenges because we want to have a prosperous and sustainable planet. So if we're to look closely at these challenges we're facing, so food scarcity, for example, more than 800 million people are affected by food scarcity. Malnutrition, 2 billion people suffer from malnutrition. Then also the environmental cost of food production is no longer sustainable because it's just, going up and up in terms of economy. And also the other issue is there is a need to increase food production by more than 60% to be able to meet the growing population. So using the correct methods of food production we have at the moment, it's estimated that the global greenhouse gases is going to increase by 80%, which is quite a lot. So if we were to look, for example, at the livestock production, looking at cows, for example, they produce 14.5% of the global greenhouse gases. And this will definitely increase also. And the majority of this is in the form of methane. So what can we do? We do need a better solution. So looking at the challenges we face now, we can link it to the potential exploitation of microorganisms, microbial bioeconomy. My favorite statement by Louis Pasteur, that really inspired me, is the role of infinitely small in nature is infinitely large. I mean, this shows the transformative power of microorganisms. I was really, really inspired when I was very young, and I went on to do my degree in industrial microbiology and then PhD in chemical engineering. Because growing up in Africa, I witnessed firsthand from television and also seeing lots of children that suffer from malnutrition, particularly kwashiorkor, which is the lack of protein in many children. So this experience ignited me, and I remember dreaming, microbes are everywhere. We have the good, we have the bad, and we have the ugly. Can we use the good microbes to produce food, particularly proteins, to feed all those children in the heart kwashiorkor? So I pursued a degree in industrial microbiology, as I've said, and then my PhD, I was looking at how can we use microbes for food. So single-cell protein production became a passion of mine. So my goal, as an associate professor, moving on to professor, is to develop a sustainable food solutions through microbial bioeconomy. And I also envisage a future where microbial food plays a pivotal role in addressing global food scarcity or challenge by providing affordable food, nutritious, and also sustainable option to population worldwide. So what I will do today is a bit about microbial bioeconomy, and then I'll also share some of the researches we're doing here at the University of Birmingham, just to enthuse you all about how we can use microorganisms. Okay? So bioeconomy utilizes biological resources and knowledge, but microbial bioeconomy uses microorganisms to create sustainable biodegradable products. And one of the goals is to replace non-renewable and reduce environmental pollution. So for example, we can produce different types of products, from microorganisms like antimicrobial, bacteriocins for food preservation, and also can use microbes and cells as food. I'll get down to some of the experiments we're doing at the university here. I'm just trying to navigate these slides. Okay. So in terms of food safety, we all know we can use microbes, to improve food and, ensure food is safe, like fermentation, for example. Lactobacillus species, we can use them to produce yogurts and cheese. And what happens is during the conversion, it lowers the pH, making small-age microorganisms unable to grow in them. So that's one way of preserving food. So we can use microbes also to improve food organoleptic qualities, like Saccharomyces cerevisiae that is used to make, beer, wine, fermentation, the taste and everything. Microbes as food additives. We can use some of the metabolic pathway, like citric acid production, to help in preservation of food, or as probiotics, like the other speaker talked about today. We can add them to food for our gut health. Also in biopreservation, microorganisms lend, a very, very, good part because they produce, bacteriocins, which are natural antimicrobials. So there's no need for chemical fertilizers. We can use that sustainably. Then biofertilizers will have some microorganisms that are able to convert nitrogen from the air. So amazing, use of microbes, in sustainability. So what I'm going to be sharing particularly today is some research we're doing, in my research group, and I work with another colleague of mine, on the Food Research Center of Excellence called HITA. So we're doing quite a lot of exciting experiments, and I'll share a few of them, like algae-based flour formation, which is a biodegradable plastics that we can use, and we're producing this HITA code from food waste. Then the other aspect is food waste valorization. We're doing quite a lot of research, and I'll share a little bit about it in a couple of slides to come. So moving on to the next slide, then we have the first one. I'm so passionate about this. So in this, we're using algae, to be specific, chlorella, to produce flour that can be used in the food industry, in the bakery industry, to be precise, to make cakes and bread. So what we're trying to do here is to metagenomically engineer the algae, which is already a rich source of protein and vitamins, but to produce more protein by formulation and reformulating it, adding the right nutrients. So then we downstream it, produce a flour that is already fortified through our formulation, and make bread. And this is quite important because you don't need the fertilizers you need, if you are growing things, naturally, or, and on the soil. You don't need soil. So land use is reduced. We grow them in fermenters, and, the microbes grow quite fast. Algae grows quite fast. So get it to a high density, less water used, and we can produce flour that can be used in the baking industry. So this is really exciting project we're doing. The second one I'd like to share about is one of my favorite research. It's about, I call it biomining, or bioremediation, or biorecovery of heavy metals in water. So in this case, we're getting E. coli, trying to engineer E. coli so we can use it to mop up contaminants in water. So what we've done so far is lead, copper, and zinc. And my dream and my passion is to be able to use this to mop up gold water, in gold mining. And, I shared this passion one day, and I found that another colleague of mine at another university is already doing it. They're already using microorganisms, to biomine from gold water. So I now move my vision again to maybe diamonds, you never know, But jokes apart, you can actually get microorganisms to mop up these contaminants that you have, from crude oil or, in water, pick them up, then you can harvest it and get it back into the circular economy. So this is quite amazing. So we're still at the process of doing this, fine-tune it. We've got 2 PhD students on it, and watch the space for exciting results. Now, the other research we're doing is in biopreservation, using lactic acid to produce bacteriocins, and bacteriocins are antimicrobial peptides produced by microbes, because microbes tend to fight, with each other, and some of them can produce bacteriocins. So you can use this in extension of shelf life. and they are added to food also. But what we're doing in the lab is micro-encapsulating it and putting it into, covering for food to try and extend the shelf life of food. So we've been able to optimize this process, and we're now going down to the next phase of micro-encapsulating it into biodegradable plastics to use for active food packaging. So this is quite exciting project. Other amazing experiments we're doing in the university here in my lab is food waste valorization. So we're looking at it from another angle, so you can use food waste to make biofuels and bioproducts. But what we're trying to do is to use sustainable ways to try and extract the bioactive compounds from those food waste. So particularly, we have students looking at coffee, cocoa bean shell, coffee waste, and also eggshell waste. And they've been able to use supercritical fluid and omic extraction to get some bioactive compounds. We're still fine-tuning that. And the next phase is to go through the bio route to see can we use microbial cells to try and break it down to get those bioactive compounds. So this is quite exciting because, we're able to valorize quite a lot of the food waste and get some products. But we're trying to now optimize the production process to ensure we use less energy, so it's more productive. And then this is one of the exciting research we're doing also at the moment. So we're using yeast slurry, which is used in beer industry, and we're using yeast slurry to make biodegradable plastics for food covering. And what we're doing now is using the niacin we've extracted to put into the, plastics, biodegradable plastics for the covering of the food to protect the food in terms of microbial contamination and also extend the shelf life. So we have optimized the production of the yeast slurry bioplastics. We're still trying to do some more experiments in that angle. But also what we have started recently is looking at other food wastes. So yeast slurry, we're looking at eggshells and looking at other, trying to make biodegradable plastics using pectin from the eggshells and other wastes we're doing. So this is quite exciting because it's greens, it shows extended shelf life, natural approach to food preservation because we're using niacin, which is produced by microorganisms, and they're edible, but we've not tried that out yet. We're still in the process of optimizing. The last, just to say, in my lab, although we have a lot of research we're doing, we're also working with other industries. And one of the exciting things we've done recently is working with a company called BioBD. So they produce this light bulb that is UV free, and they claim that it is, microbiocidal. Okay, so they have validated it against viruses and quite a few other tests they've done. So what we're doing in-house here in the university is to test it against multiple food pathogens. So we've done a couple of tests, which was really promising and very exciting. So we've tested it on E. coli and also Bacillus cereus, and we saw 4 log reductions after 3 hours of exposure to the light, just natural light you can replace your light bulb with. And then we saw complete elimination of the vegetative forms of the organism after 24 hours. So we've done the test on stainless steel, on nutrient broth, and also on nutrient agar, and we had the control. So if you look at the picture A here, that is the nutrient broth under the light, and the B is under ordinary fluorescent light in another hood as a control. So this is quite exciting because once we got those results, we decided, okay, fine, let us use flow cytometry to check to see if the cells are really dead or if they're just stressed and gone into viable but non-culturable state. So using flow cytometry, we're able to resolve that they are actually dead because they picked up the stain propymium iodide that only stains disrupted DNAs. So that was really, really encouraging. So it's a very exciting research because this can help in the fight against antimicrobial resistance. So imagine if this is able to eliminate pathogens. It lends itself to many applications, not just in the food industry, but also in healthcare. Anywhere that we need to be kept, in animal husbandry. And what we've done recently is do some tests for them in a piggery and also in a horse farm to check with the light bulbs on, does it reduce the microbial contamination? And very promising results. So it's still, early stages because I'm trying to do quite a lot of challenge testing. So there is hope as we prepare for the unexpected. So moving on to the next slide. There are definitely challenges, to the use of microbial bioeconomy or microorganisms. For example, antimicrobial resistance or antibiotic resistance is a big challenge, but there are ways we can go around that, and there's change in biodiversity due to climate change that is coming. So we need to be able to think about ways that we can mitigate that, changing in biodiversity. Microorganisms that are naturally not pathogenic can acquire pathogenicity from the environment. So we have emerging and re-emerging pathogens. What can we do? So, but the good thing is, once we're aware of these issues, then we can have ways and research that can help to mitigate that. For example, we can produce crops that are resistant to climate change impact. So there are ways around it, So we have microbial pathogenicity and biosecurity. So what can we do? Because working with microorganisms or pathogens in the lab, imagine if they're being released into the atmosphere, what will happen? So we have to think about ways to overcome, these issues and challenges. And there are many more challenges that are going to come as we exploit the use of microorganisms in mitigating the impact of climate change and also in food security or insecurity. So just to finish up, because I'm mindful of time, so we can have some questions. So there is a significant role of microbial bioeconomy. So microbial bioeconomy, we have stated, plays a very important role. Significant role of microbial bioeconomy because they play a crucial role in enhancing food safety and sustainability by utilizing microorganisms to produce biodegradable materials, manage waste, and create bio-based products. However, the use of microbes in food production, preservation, and waste management demonstrates significant benefit. Despite these benefits, there are certain challenges, that we'll face, and what we can do is how to address these challenges will involve ongoing research, development, and collaborations amongst various stakeholders to ensure the resilience and sustainability of food systems in an unpredictable world.
Thank you very much. This was quite insightful presentation. I can see the future is technology driven. What do you think? Is it necessary for us to be embracing that much technological advancement in our food production?
I don't think we have a choice, to be honest. We need to definitely embrace it. But that's why it's very important, like I was excited with the topic of this year's, International Food Safety Day, prepare for the unexpected, expect the unexpected. So we need to prepare for it properly because technology is a new way. Innovative technology in food production, we're moving towards that direction because the traditional way of food production, for example, is no longer sustainable. So there are so many things coming, alternative proteins, insect-based protein, plant-based proteins, all these are going to come with challenges. And so we need to be prepared in terms of food safety. How can we ensure that these innovative technologies are coming up? We can mitigate the impact of, food safety in terms of those technologies.
So what are some specific examples of microbial processes that can improve food safety and sustainability? Something that is really pressing that we have to address.
Yeah, we've talked about fermentation. We can grow microorganisms to a very large quantity using very limited nutrients and also not using fertilizers to produce it in fermenter, large quantities, so that addresses food security. And in terms of safety, the thing about fermentation is when you produce products using fermentation, the acids that are produced will definitely, get rid of the spoilers, for example, and some pathogens. So fermentation is one of the key methods of food preservation and also, food safety in some aspect.
Other questions, they're congratulating you for the nice talk. And a question from the audience. I would appreciate the weaknesses and threats of these applications being introduced beyond their strengths or benefits. For example, using chlorella algae in baking. And maybe this is related to the previous questions, which are did you try more specific questions, obviously? Did you try to get any biopolymers from algal sources which can be used in preparation of food packing materials? And did you think algal can be a sustainable food source in the future? So probably these three questions are related, but they're from different people.
Yeah, definitely. Algae can be a sustainable food source in the future. I'm definitely going for that because of the way we can produce it to large quantity. We don't need land. I mean, there are so many issues with land space, water usage, limited water. So definitely algae can be used. But then there are challenges, like in everything in life, there are certain challenges. And what I believe is understanding the impact of, for example, climate change on microbial communities. Once we understand the challenge, then we can develop resilient microbial strain, like I mentioned earlier, or biotechnologies that can withstand the climate change conditions. So, even issues of regulatory and monitoring is quite important. We consider that. Pathogenicity, microbes, like I mentioned earlier, they can pick up pathogens from the environment. So you can see a microorganism that is not normally pathogenic becoming pathogenic because it can pick up those genes. So these are things we need to consider, and so that's why it's very important that we look at, research. So these are good innovative techniques, but before we pull it out into the, being used, we're going to look at all the safety aspects as well. So we're just looking at the techniques. Is it possible? Yes. Can we, metagenomically get our algae to produce products of interest? Yes, we can. So the next stage will be producing bread, testing it, and also doing quite a lot of safety regulatory, processes before it comes out in the public.
Yeah.
But algae is being used, and it's safe.
Yeah. So what are the futuristic plan or steps to overcome antibiotic resistance, specifically in the bioeconomy?
So that was quite interesting because I've just come back from Geneva, and what we went to do, we went to give a talk about the light. The light bulb I talked about. So that light bulb I mentioned kills microbes. So imagine if we were to use those light bulbs everywhere. It's just like natural bulb we use, and then we don't need to have the use antibiotic. So because if the light bulbs can kill the microbes, it does kill it. So there's no need to use antibiotics in feeds and, so that will help, to combat that issue, that particular issue. But it's still on the infancy stage. We're still doing lots of experiments in that area. So there are other ways. When I went for the conference, people are talking about innovative ways of circumventing antimicrobial resistance. So the one, and I talked about the BioLight. That light to me, it's just revolutionary. If I imagine how the impact can be in terms of antimicrobial resistance, which is a big issue we're having at the moment. Because microbes are amazing. I just love microorganisms. They're so clever. And one thing I tell everyone, my favorite song when I think about microorganisms is what doesn't kill them makes them stronger. So, I like that. So we have to, so it's an ongoing thing. So that's why we need researchers speaking to each other. We need to go for conferences and see what is going and speak to each other and co-create, solutions to the future, what we need to do in the future. So it's very important we collaborate. Thank you.
Yeah, microbes definitely in microorganism and everything is definitely in our future. So what may be the expected timeframes for commercially available bioactive bioplastics for packaging?
So it depends on the funding, to be honest. So we're looking for funding. We had a seed fund, from the Food Research Network, which was quite good. That helped us to get it to where we've gotten it to now. So to show that it's possible, we produce the plastics, and it is really amazing plastic that is quite clear from yeast slurry. So now, once we get more funding, we're going to go into production, large scale, and then the testing. So watch this space. Hopefully, we'll be able to publish some of our results.
Yeah. Nicola, any other questions from the audience that I didn't ask?
I can't see any further. Oh, hang on. There's, but I also have one. Consumer acceptance, and all of this concern that we hear, the backlash that's going on in the media and with consumers across the world on ultra high processed foods. And also, if you think also about our earlier speaker as well, talking about probiotics, obviously the baddies in the bug world are going to be killed by things like these lights or harmed, affected. But what the probiotics also will be. So what will be the effect on the gut microflora?
The effect of what?
The light, the sterilization is going to, it's going to.
So, for example, the light, the frequency of the light is in such a way that it only kills pathogens, pathogenic microorganisms. So these are the things I'm testing out in the lab because I'm not the one that produces the light. I'm just validating it for them. So they have shown in other studies that it wouldn't kill lactobacillus, okay? But it will kill pathogenic microorganisms because of the wavelength. So these are some of the, tests, because I've just got into an agreement with the company and I'm going to do all these testings to be sure. Because if, for example, it kills the natural commensals, we don't want that. That's not very good. We're going to be exposing ourselves to much more, contamination and other things, or maybe be more sensitive to, normal commensals or opportunistic pathogens. Let me say opportunistic pathogens. So those are some of the tests we're doing at the moment. Hopefully we'll get there. Then in terms of acceptance, we're doing, along with the experiments we're doing quite a few surveys to see how will people feel about green bread, okay? And green cakes. And apparently green is the color of sustainability. Everyone likes green. And there was the British Bake Off they do here in the UK. The person that produces green cake and bread won. So, it's been accepted. But the good thing about chlorella, this algae, you can actually get it to produce other colors by changing the nutrients. So you can get it to be green or red or any other color we want. But I just like the green, So alongside, we're doing quite a lot of questionnaires to see how people accept it. And right now, I think people are moving towards, alternative protein, alternative source, natural produced foods. So yeah, there is hope, but we still have a couple of more years to come to get it to the final. Yeah.
Excellent. So we're ready to expect the unexpected for the future. Great.
Yeah, definitely. Nicola, I will ask you to stay still, and I will ask also John and to join us with Helen. And I would like to ask you to tell me what is for three of you personally International Food Safety Day. Probably we can start with Helen because she's already talking.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
So what is for you International Food Safety Day? What means for you personally?
Oh, for me, International Food Safety Day is a day of celebration and collaboration, opportunity to get to meet other, people that are very passionate about food safety. Food safety is not something we can joke with. It's very important that we all have the same vision, which we do, to create a fair and sustainable and prosperous food systems, that not only for economical benefits, but also that we can eat nutritious food safely. So to me, it's a very important day because coming from Africa, people, the regulation is not as much. So food safety, is not, is important, but is not looked at. Let me say why I say this, because when I started here at the University of Birmingham and I put up a program about food safety, I did invite quite a few colleagues from Nigeria, and to come, about food safety, let's celebrate. And I was told, oh, Helen, food safety is not a problem in African stomach. It is an issue. It is a problem in everyone's stomach. So it's an opportunity to talk about food safety, to celebrate it internationally, and to say, this is something we all need to be careful about, and we all need to work together to ensure that when we eat food, we don't fall ill. So to me, it's very important. Thank you.
Yeah. And I can see personal and culturally related as well. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you very much. John, you're next.
Thank you. I was about to say it is, rather than thinking of risks, it's more an opportunity to reflect how how good we are, but also the fact is global. Particularly for somebody somewhere like in the UK, to remember that it's how much you're concerned about food safety is all relative. First, you have to worry about having food security.
Yeah.
Then you may worry about whether it kills you or not, that aspect of food safety. And then actually we're in quite a fortunate position to now be talking about, is my packaging compliant with BRC standards or whatever it might be. Yeah. So how high it is on your radar is very relative, and you have to take a global view.
Yeah, and for some people around the world, it's a very difficult step to take before they reach even, food at their tables. Still,
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yeah, Nicola.
Well, like the other speakers, I'm really happy that there's a spotlight on food safety on World Food Safety Day, and that's great. One thing, again, that reflects this, where does food security fit with food safety? And in terms of setting up this webinar, somebody came to me and said, well, when you say World Food Safety Day, what do you mean? Do you mean food security, or is it avoiding foodborne illness? What is it? Because the country that they came from, they said that the word is the same in their language. And therefore it's not really very well defined when they talk about it. And I think we've heard today about a few things, and also we've got another webinar running on Monday, and we've got speakers talking about lots of different things: regulations, food security, food safety, and future new technologies. And it all merges together, and that's great, but I think that it might start to confuse consumers.
Hopefully they're smart enough not to be confused, but we as a scientist need to continue helping them solving all the challenges that they're going to have ahead. Thanks again for all of our wonderful speakers, and also our co-organizer, the International Food Safety Organization based in Hong Kong. Thank you, Professor Hoi Han Kwang, Dr. Helen Oryanka, and John Points. Thank you, Nicola, for all your help setting up this webinar. And thank you for all of our wonderful audience being with us today. I would like to welcome you all to put your abstract in our newly launched website, just freshly launched today. The website is www.ghiworldcongress.org, and this is for our upcoming World Congress, which is going to be held 25th to 27th of June 2025 in Hilton Hotel Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And our Congress team is connecting food security, safety, health, and sustainability challenges ahead. And we have started already discussing these challenges with our webinars for the International Food Safety Day. And we'll continue, as Nico said, on Monday, again, 10th of June. If you haven't registered, go on our website and register for this new exciting webinar that we are going to have on Monday as well. Thanks again for being with us. I hope you have a safe day, night, whatever on this globe you are present. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye from me, Dr. Diana Bogieva. See you at our next webinar on Monday. Still keep learning, smiling, stay safe, healthy, happy, and curious. Goodbye.